So there's this new political coalition in the Philippines, and it's called RAGE. I mean, what a name, right? It definitely gets your attention. But the real question, the one at the heart of the source we're digging into today, is what's that rage all about? Is this a real movement for reform, or is it a powerful family's retaliation against being held accountable? Let's break it down.
Okay, so officially, RAGE is an acronym. It stands for the Reform Alliance for Good Governance and Accountability. The person leading the charge is Sebastian Baste Duterte, the mayor of Davao City. And here's the key part. He's the brother of the current vice president, Sara Duterte, who's right in the middle of a major political storm.
You know, this quote from the source we're looking at, it just cuts right to the chase. The op-ed is basically saying the name RAGE isn't just a clever acronym, it's more like an accidental confession. The idea here is that while the coalition is dressed up in the language of reform, the real thing driving it, the content, is pure, raw rage from a political family that feels like it's under attack. To really get that argument, the source tells us we need to look closer at the launch itself. Because, in politics, the where and the when of something happening, those are never just little details. A lot of the time, they're the entire story. And this slide really lays it all out. On the left, you've got 1986. Club Filipino is the site where the People Power Revolution hits its peak, a massive movement for accountability. Now, look at the right. The source argues that this new movement in 2026 is the total opposite. It's launched in the very same place to defend a leader from accountability. The symbolism is just wow. And the timing? According to the op-ed, that's just as deliberate. The RAGE launch happens on April 12th. Now get this, just 2 days later, on the 14th, a key witness is scheduled to testify in Vice President Sara Duterte's impeachment hearing. The source is pretty blunt about it. This isn't a coincidence. They call it a political operation, timed perfectly to apply maximum pressure right before that hearing. Okay, so let's get into the platform itself. The source spends a lot of time analyzing what it calls these deep paradoxes. These contradictions between what the RAGE coalition claims it wants and, well, the controversies that are swirling around its own leaders. And the context for everything we're about to talk about really comes down to this number, 612.5 million pesos. The source tells us this is the total amount of confidential funds used by Vice President Sara Duterte that are now under heavy scrutiny, and they're right at the very heart of her impeachment case. The op-ed points out this really fascinating, almost ironic clash in messaging. On one hand, you have the RAGE coalition telling the public to be vigilant and be accountable. But then at the same time, the vice president on a recent tour was telling students to be kind and be careful. The author frames this as a really telling difference in priorities between the movement and the leader it's trying to protect. So this is really the core of the argument, right here in this table. It's the direct contradiction between words and actions. Look at this. RAGE demands we be accountable, but the source points to 125 million pesos in confidential funds spent in just 11 days. They say be informed, but the vice president filed 3 petitions trying to block evidence from being gathered. They tell us to be vigilant against corruption, while their leader, according to the complaint, is facing allegations of 2 billion pesos in unexplained wealth. The source goes even deeper into the spending, highlighting a rate of 11.3 million pesos a day. But this is where the story gets really, really weird. The most incredible detail cited is that receipts used to account for millions were supposedly made out to people with names like Mary Grace Piatos and Carlos Miguel Oishi. And here's the kicker. According to the Philippine Statistics Authority, there's no record that these people even exist. All of this leads to the one big concept the author uses to diagnose the entire RAGE coalition. They called it a masterclass in selective outrage. So what is selective outrage? Well, the source defines it as getting really angry about what your opponents are doing while totally ignoring the exact same or maybe even worse behavior from your own side. It's all about having one set of rules for them and a completely different, much easier set of rules for you. The op-ed then lays out a pattern of this. RAGE demands accountability for their rivals' alleged corruption, but is silent on its own family's missing funds. They want to lift bank secrecy for officials, but conveniently not for the vice president. The author's point is that every single demand seems tailor-made to attack opponents while protecting themselves. And in their view, that's not a reform movement. That's just politics as usual. So where does this leave us? What's the final verdict from the source? Is this coalition really about reform? Is it all just a political trick, a ruse? Or is it, at the end of the day, just about rage?
Well, the author's conclusion is pretty straightforward. They argue that rage is not a reform movement at all. Instead, they call it a propaganda war and a deflection operation. Basically, a big media strategy designed to change the subject, to get the spotlight off the impeachment and shine it on their political enemies instead.
And according to the source, this is exactly why that propaganda is so crucial to them. You see, a recent survey showing 53% of the public is against the impeachment. But the House committee, which is looking at the actual evidence, voted 98% in favor of the complaints having substance. The author's argument is that Rage's real goal is to use that favorable public opinion as a weapon to put pressure on a constitutional process that's supposed to be based on facts, not on polling numbers.
At the end of the day, the op-ed brings it all back to a very simple idea. It argues that a genuine reform movement is one that holds everyone to the exact same standard, especially its own leaders. And by that measure, the author concludes, the Rage Coalition just doesn't make the cut. And so, we're left with the big question that the source wants us to think about. At what point does a movement's righteous rage for reform cross a line and become nothing more than an elaborate defense against accountability for its own people? That's the question this op-ed leaves on the table.